All right, guys, on this episode of In Defense of Fitness, we're going to go through this video. The video is called The Rise and Fall of CrossFit, 15,000 Gym Empire for Sale. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of factual things said, and I actually haven't watched through it, so I'm going to watch through it, and hopefully it's not too distracting and I'm not covering up too much on the side. Let's see what we got here.
So at its peak, CrossFit was an absolute juggernaut in the world of fitness. It had over 15,000 locations, which is more than 3 times the number that its closest competitor had.
So part of that's true. We touted a 15,000 person, not 15,000 person, 15,000 affiliate thing. Back when Greg was still the CEO, he used that number a few times. I think there's some debate around whether or not those 15,000 were 15,000 paying members or not. There are definitely, there's some evidence pointing to those gyms being not all up to date and current, but there at one point in time there were 15,000 CrossFit affiliates, people who had used the name and licensed the name, but some of those were less than stellar at paying their service fees. So, but that is a thing. It was awesome. Let's see what else we got.
It had title sponsors in the form of Reebok, and millions of people were doing the sport. But fast forward,
I'm actually not sure what the total number of people who were doing it were. The interesting thing is this guy's clearly kind of showing his inability to understand the CrossFit as a sport versus CrossFit as a training methodology, because he said millions of people were doing the sport, which I guess is technically true, because if you're doing a training methodology, you are doing the sport to some degree, but that would be like saying, you know, anyone who runs is into marathons. The act of running is different than the act of competing in marathons. One is more of a sport, or a fitness event, and one is more of just a way to be fit. So he's showing a little bit that he doesn't quite know, and I don't know who this guy is, he doesn't quite know what CrossFit is, but we'll see.
just a few years later, the brand is up for sale a second time in 5 years. It's been through 3 CEOs, and it's mired in trouble. So this is a video that is about the rise and fall of this iconic fitness brand. My name is Michael. I record videos that talk about the rise and fall of iconic companies, and I use that as a way to explain business. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, do me a favor. I do bi-weekly lectures on the internet. They're free. You can come in via...
It's interesting. People who offer business advice, there's a lot of them out there who've seen CrossFit from the outside looking in. I think all businesses are run slightly different. There's commonalities amongst business, but the way CrossFit works and what it is as a business is very not different. Well, it is different than a lot of other businesses. There's a cult following in a way, and a core methodology that's quite variable, that will change kind of how you can monetize like the larger picture. So I'm curious to see how he unpacks this, but it's always strange for me to watch people who don't understand it from the inside try to explain what it is from the outside. So we'll see how that goes.
Via Zoom, and I talk about business concepts. If you're interested in learning and helping your own business, come see me. There's a link below. You can sign up. And if you stick around through this whole video, I will explain to you why I'm recording it in front of a building with a Felice sign on it that used to be a former auto garage and now has a bunch of graffiti on it. It might surprise you.
Using the right weight matters. The Body Pod lets you easily understand what is the fastest.
So husband and wife team, Lauren Janai and Greg Glassman, started CrossFit back in 2000. And it was basically the perfect counter to everything that was going on in fitness at the time. In fact, to understand the story of CrossFit, you really have to understand the personality of Greg Glassman. He's somebody who is just a natural contrarian. If you say the sky is blue, he's going to tell you it's green. And that's just the way he operates.
I don't think that's true. Yes, what he said around it was a perfect contradiction to what was out there at the time in terms of fitness, because fitness has devolved to a place of selling memberships that weren't used and making things as safe as possible by making them as non-functional as possible, by making the least amount of effort required. So getting people in machines that isolated a single body part and the entire focus was on just looking a certain way, and we sold, sitting on a treadmill and watching TV while you did it, just as a lowering the barrier to entry to try to get anyone to do it, because we were realizing that people were getting sick and dying and they needed fitness help. So that was where fitness was at the time. And he came by and said, like, this is all bullshit. We need to actually sell something that people are going to use. And he had very different visions around function and injury and risk and things like that, just noting that there's an inverse relationship between the safetification of things and where they had gone and the effect. So when you made things as safe as they did, they also made them relatively ineffectual at developing change. So he had created a lot of stuff there. The thing I really want to disagree with, though, is he's not contrarian just to be contrarian. If you said the sky was green, he would say, why do you think it's green? Let's talk about that and let's unpack why it's not green. Now, if you said the sky is blue, he wouldn't just say the sky is green. He might say something like, well, it's technically azure, and let's go into the shades of blue, because he is an intellect and he's very intelligent, but he wouldn't just be contrarian for the sake of contrarian. I think that that's a misunderstanding of Greg. It's honestly, I would say it's more of like, he would question everything. He'd be like, okay, why are we doing this? And if he found compelling reasons to no longer do it, he would be like, we don't need to do this anymore, regardless of if all of academia said we need to be doing this. If he felt that there was something missing here, he would then try to find the missing thing, or he would push back on that. So he's not contrarian by nature. I mean, he is a libertarian by nature, but it's not just to push back. It was an effort to do things that mattered and things that worked. So I don't agree with that classification.
And the thing about CrossFit is it took everything that existed in fitness at the time and did the exact opposite. Instead of gyms where you showed up whenever you want, there were set class times. Instead of long, kind of boring, low-intensity workouts, you did short, high-intensity bursts. And there was all kinds of other things they did when they invented CrossFit that was just the opposite of the way everybody else did things. And one thing that they did that was totally the opposite.
Well, so interestingly there, like, again, it wasn't just to be contrarian to what was going on at the time. It was for effect. It was like, if we're training in an effort to spend the least amount of time in the gym and get the most amount of effect from it, effect being an increase in fitness, capacity, all the things that are beneficial from exercise, we should be training like this. And it wasn't like, hey, here's what's going on, let's not do it. It was like, well, there's something missing. Well, how can we make it work? And so CrossFit was created. It did happen to be contrary to what was then, or what was at the time, which is not quite the case now, but it was for effect, not just to be contrarian.
It was used basically an open source model to do their workout system and do the CrossFit brand. It was something that they had borrowed from the open source software movement, which is you give away the product for free and you make money by selling other stuff on top of it. And this was all enabled by the internet. Distribution costs were basically free. You post it online, anybody can download it, and then you basically go from there. And one thing that was easy to do on the internet was to build the sense of community. People would gather around those types of things. And CrossFit was built around a website, CrossFit.com, where people would go. And it turns out that millennials who were coming of age at the time and older and younger Gen X, they were hungry for this sort of thing. They wanted to go and belong to a community. And CrossFit, well, it offered that around.
I think human beings in general want to belong to a community. I don't think that is specific to millennials or, as he said, Gen X or Gen Z on either side. I think it's just human beings want to be in a community. And yes, the internet allowed us to scale the methodology, but the real communities were the ones that happened within the gym. So you felt like you were part of something bigger because you were following the larger CrossFit messaging, but your real connection was with the internal community of your local gym.
This fitness methodology. And the early 2000s saw the lowest decline we'd seen in history of what's called the third place. So if you think about society, typically you have your first place, which is home. Second place is just where you go to work. And the third place is this other place where you go to find meaning and substance in life. And for a lot of people, for decades, that was church. But early in the 2000s, we reached our lowest church participation in history, where it dropped below 40% in the United States. And for many, you could go and join your tribe at a CrossFit box. They didn't call it a gym, by the way, because that would have been too conventional. And there you could find your
Yes and no. I mean, it wasn't that we didn't call it a gym because it was too conventional. I mean, they were gyms. We all called them gyms, but we also call them boxes. And the reason for that is because they were often in warehouses that looked like just big boxes. They didn't look and feel like a conventional gym at the time. Now, a lot more gyms look like CrossFit gyms, but at the time it was very unique. But a CrossFit box was, I mean, it was a good term, but it wasn't just because like the way he's making it sound is like, we're just trying to be contrarian. It's like, not really. But people did like that at the time, especially early adopters who were into basically things that push back against the current narrative, which is what any early movement does.
tribe in your third place and a place to socialize. It was perfect for folks who were hungry for that kind of stuff. And up until this time, the way that fitness chains grew was one of two ways. One is you grew company-owned stores, meaning you owned all the stores and controlled them and invested your own money in them. The second way was through a franchise model. You would work with independent entrepreneurs, they would join your franchise system, and they would follow your rules. But CrossFit did it a different way, which enabled them to grow faster than any of those other concepts. They did it through a licensing model. And basically, you would show up, pay for a weekend seminar, go through their training, pass a small test, and then you had the ability to pay CrossFit an annual fee to name your gym and call it a CrossFit gym.
So this is all true. This is all exactly the differences in the model. So we run a licensing model versus a franchise, or the other model he said, I don't know what it was, but that did allow for all of that. Now, what he is slightly wrong with is initially there actually wasn't a test. So it was not a tested course. It was just the 2-day course. And then you got the rights to license the name, which was even, for probably from his perspective, less of a barrier to entry because you didn't even have to pass a test. And now you have to pass a test, which doesn't change the outcome of it much. The test is pretty straightforward and people can pass it. But yeah.
Would this make you buy a Ridge wallet? 2 people could win a Lamborghini Huracan Sterrato, a Hennessy Velociraptor.
And in the business world, what CrossFit did was take the idea of counter positioning to an extreme. And counter positioning is when your business goes in and takes some fundamental aspect of the other people's businesses, and you just do exactly the opposite and create a business model that they can't compete with. And in the case of everything they did, from the anti-franchise methodology, to the licensing stuff, to the way the exercise worked, to the way the brand worked, it was all just going exactly the opposite of the way everybody had done everything up until that point.
And again, it sounds like he's saying that this was done intentionally by Greg just as a way to be contrarian. That's not the case. It's just that a lot of stuff in those spaces weren't working for actually getting people to achieve higher levels of fitness. And part of the model of real gyms, quote unquote, conventional gyms is about selling memberships that don't get used. If all of the people who bought memberships at conventional gyms, all like 3,000 people showed up, the gyms would be screwed. They're selling the idea of fitness rather than selling the actual act of getting fit. Now, a self-motivated person will use that and can do it, but the vast majority of people don't follow that. So they're selling the idea of fitness rather than it. So in order to push back on that, things had to change and be different. Hence the business model being very different. And then also, same with methodology and all these other pieces, it was a different approach in general because other things weren't working to achieve the result of more fit people. That's why they were they way.
It worked incredibly well. From just 13 affiliated gyms in 2005, they were up to 5,000 by 2008 and 13,000 by 2013.
500 by 2008. 5,000 was more around the 2014 era.
And you can do the math. If your average affiliate is paying $3,000 or $4,000 a year.
Okay, so he's doing the math now, but he's actually doing the math wrong because the math at that time was $500 a month. $500 a year for the affiliates. And then it went to $1,000 a year. And then it went to like $1,500 a year. So I think now it's 3,000 or 4,000, but that was not the case back then. So the math he's going to do here is going to be way off for the initial, all the years up until 2023, I want to say. It didn't really change.
Times 13,000 gyms, but ends up being 30, 40, 50 million a year in licensing revenue for the chain. Just incredible. And by 2013, there's no exact measurement of how many members were doing CrossFit at these gyms or doing them outside the gyms, but some estimates went as high as 5 million participants worldwide. And
It's cool.
I know there was a lot of people excited about it because I was one of them. 2009 was when I first got into CrossFit. And man, it felt a little bit like joining a cult.
Cool. So I didn't know he was a CrossFitter. It's cool to know that he is. So he does have some inside understanding of it. But what's interesting is like he's even said a few things that don't actually, they're not real within the space. Just it's as a fundamental misunderstanding of the methodology, which is, I hope he gets into it, is one of the things that you could argue would be the disadvantage of having something that is not a franchise, but fits in the licensee model, is you can't control the narrative specifically around what members receive because there's a person in the middle who can make independent decisions, which is the coach and the affiliate, which can sometimes be great and can sometimes lead to a misunderstood understanding of what CrossFit is, which is like, this guy's a business guy, quite smart, still doesn't understand it.
And the joke back then, and still to some extent now, is how do you know if somebody's a CrossFitter? Well, don't worry. They'll tell you within 5 minutes.
Yes. So it's funny that he is, and it is very cult-like. And the reason is like anything that allows you to feel really good and there's other people around you who are passionate about it, you're probably going to be like, oh my God, I got to tell others about it. And CrossFit is that. And I have no shame in that. That's awesome.
And I was definitely one of those people. I had the t-shirts, the whole deal. And validate.
Now, that being said, I would say that people take it too far. When you are yelling at people about this amazing program that you have over and over again, they don't want to hear it. You're not changing minds. You're just turning people off. So if you are new to CrossFit, I would say, yeah, tell your friends, do this stuff. But wait for them to ask you like, hey, what are you doing? What makes you so fit? What's going on? And you're like, oh, I do CrossFit. Come try it out with me. And versus shoving it down people's throats.
The nation came with that amount of membership. In 2011, Reebok came calling, and they signed a $150 million 10-year sponsorship deal to become the title sponsor for CrossFit that year.
Well, no, they signed to be the title sponsor for CrossFit Games. And I know they're not two different entities, but that was a very specific thing, which was the CrossFit Games, which was the sport component of CrossFit, which is very different in terms of its application and the way it's done as to the in-gym methodology, as anyone has seen it before. So the interesting thing was Reebok really was not cool at the time. Like Reebok has made a resurgence since then. Like there was a lot that Reebok got from that relationship. And Reebok was, it was garbage as a company. They were struggling when it came to being relevant in a social space, but it's definitely come a long way since then. So there was a lot gained by Reebok in that.
And similarly, ESPN started to televise the Global CrossFit Games, the championship for the fittest alive, on their TV stations. CrossFit had totally arrived. And the brand did something incredible in terms of its competition, the CrossFit Games. You see, people of any sort could enter globally and be part of the competition. And by 2018, 425,000 people that year entered the CrossFit Open. And you just followed the rules. You paid your $50 or whatever it is to enter it. And the winners of each
I'm pretty sure it was like $20. CrossFit. Let me Google that actually. What are the CrossFit Open fees? CrossFit Open registration fee, at least $20. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, $20 to register for athletes, not 50. So it's significantly lower than that. So let's pull this back open.
Successive level would go to the World Championship, the CrossFit Games, to be held wherever it was that year. I think it was in Madison, Wisconsin. Just an insane.
So that was one process, Games regional, Open regional games. That is, I think, the recent one. That's how it works. But before that, there's been a bunch of different steps in between, like sectionals, and there's been like, actually, that was kind of it. So sectionals was another one that was tossed in between.
Level of participation of people participating in this stuff. In 2018, that seemed like the moment that everything was going incredibly right for CrossFit. It seemed like the brand couldn't stop and it couldn't lose. But at that moment, it was when everything started to turn against the company. and the brand. And the first thing to go against the brand was it started to gain a reputation as a dangerous exercise methodology.
Incorrect. It started to get a dangerous reputation in 2005. That was the main concern from everyone in academia and everyone who saw everything that we did. It's been that way since the beginning. They have always told us it was dangerous. It did not start in 2018, but maybe his perception of it in 2018 changed.
Kind of always been part of it because it was all about being extreme and pushing yourself to limits. In fact, even the early
Maybe he admitted
mascot for CrossFit was a character, a clown-looking thing, if I recall correctly, that was called Pukey. And the idea was that you were pushing yourself so hard during these highly intense short workouts that you would vomit. And
Incorrect. Incorrect. That is actually, Pukey the Clown is a, you can see here actually, this one hooked up on the right-hand side. This is a representation of rhabdomyolysis or rhabdomyolysis. And it was kind of like a jokey warning sign. Yes, it was crude. Yes, it was over the top. And is there the potential when you go really hard to vomit? Sure. But Pukey the Clown was more of like our call to action around, and not making fun of, but making light of the fact that if you go too hard, like a clown, because we're making it a clown here, you'll throw up. So you don't want to throw up. We're not, and it's not the point of this. But beyond that, if you go way too hard and you throw up, there's the potential of getting something called rhabdomyolysis, which is such severe muscle tissue breakdown you can flood your kidneys and die of kidney failure. That's not what we're recommending, and we make light of it with this character. So it wasn't a mascot per se of like, this is what we do. It's more of a mascot of like, don't be this clown. So little misunderstanding there, but is what it is.
That kind of pushing yourself to limits, eventually that kind of getting out of control behavior can start to lead to people getting injured. And while CrossFit had always kind of fought this idea that CrossFit could be dangerous, the reality was the low barrier entry for these different coaches who would just take a weekend seminar and then suddenly start having people do highly complex barbell movements and stuff like that. You had a wide variety in the quality of instruction that was happening at these different gyms. And at their size, with 13, 15,000 gyms, even 0.5% of the gyms being unsafe or unhealthy was a pretty high exercise risk.
It was an objectively low exercise risk relative to the people who did it. So in the studies that have been done, and even the ones that showed a high risk, it's high relative to nothing. It's low relative to all other forms of exercise. When it comes to running, when it comes to cycling, when it comes to gymnastics and everything in between, there's a low risk involved. The idea too of having some instruction is significantly better than having no instruction. And even these movements done poorly are better for you than movements never done at all. And what I mean by that is that you're going to have to do a lot of these movements like lifting and carrying and throwing in life, regardless of whether you train them. So if you've never practiced lifting stuff up, even under, like, is it possible to hurt yourself? Absolutely. But if you never ever expose yourself to it and you go to then try to do it, which life is going to ask you to do, you're at a higher likelihood of injury than if you expose yourself to it in the gym. Even if it's not perfect, you're working towards it. There's also something said about these Olympic lifts, the clean and jerk and snatch, as being something that's like particularly dangerous. It's like, honestly, you have to start moving up into some pretty serious loads for those to carry significant injury risks. Most people are both strength-wise and mechanistically, like their technique is so bad that they're nowhere near like any real injuries, maybe tweaks and niggles and pains here, but the higher likelihood of injury in the stuff that we do is in overuse and repetition. So things like pull-ups, things like push-ups, things like running, things like sprinting. Like if you're doing a ton of the same stuff without taking proper care of yourself, without warming up, that's where you lead to more likelihood of injury, which we do, but depending on the gym, that'll be, laid out better or worse. So it's not the individual movements that themselves become higher risk of injury per se, and it's more the repetition and the volume that we tend to see the most injuries within the CrossFit space. Now, is it possible to hurt yourself acutely doing a single movement, like just a deadlift one time? Absolutely. A snatch one time? Sure. A clean one time? Sure. But like clean and snatch doesn't happen too often. Maybe some shoulder stuff in snatches, very, very occasionally. I very rarely see it. And then elbows and wrists. So forearms and wrists in cleans, if the elbows don't come around fast enough and it collides with the knee or something. I would say the more common ones would be shoulder light ups from like excessive hanging and pulling without good warm-ups and too much volume, too quick. I would say you see injuries around low back stuff and pulling off the ground. And oftentimes low back stuff sits in, overdeveloped glutes, understretched hamstrings, and tighter quads that go down into knee pain. But like all of these things can be mitigated through movement and through, paying attention to them. I would not say that there's a vast increase. In fact, data-wise, there's not a vast increase in injuries in CrossFit with the movements that we do. So just some clarity there.
In terms of people getting hurt. And so while the vast majority of gyms were, I would say, extremely safe, people started to notice. Folks like the New York Times started to write articles about it. The National Strength and Conditioning Association, they started to do things and studies about them. And what did CrossFit do? Well, they did some stuff to try to make it safer in the gyms. But in reality, they were very combative. And, that comes from the top. You know who's a combative, rebellious guy? Greg Glassman. And so while CrossFit...
Yeah. You're combative because it was wrong. Like objectively, it was wrong. Like the volume of people who did it, to the amount of injuries that happened, it was just an incorrect assessment of injury risk. That's why we were combative.
CrossFit is being seen as a somewhat dangerous exercise methodology. You have another thing happening, which is competitors are coming up. And a lot of the things that CrossFit had done early on, like being a small gym concept, being short, intense exercise, those are pretty unique early on. But later on, new competitors started into the market. And so concepts like F45 and Orange Theory, who were franchise concepts, they would eventually, over the 2010s, open thousands of gyms respectively. And I had friends that would go choose those concepts because they saw them as safer than some of the complex movements that would be done at a CrossFit gym.
So this is true. Those gyms started popping up and people were like, dang, these gyms are offering something close to what we do. But if you understand fitness, they're very different than what we do. Now, what it did do is it did distract people who don't understand and allowed people to go to those spaces that maybe they perceived them as safer or perceived them as easier or whatever it is. But the long term is the good CrossFit gyms who ran great spaces and had good communities, when people got done doing F45 or done doing Orange Theory, because they're very one-dimensional in what they offer. They do have some variants, they do have some stuff, but it's all circuit-based and it doesn't change a ton, are going to look for something that offers more. And that more is always going to be CrossFit. So it's not always going to be CrossFit, but CrossFit is a great place to slide into when you're like, I think I want more. I think I want something better. I think I want something that's going to last me for life, And that's what those other programs don't have, because they're not founded on the same general methodology. Similar, because there's high intensity stuff, but the complexity and the learning and the style of coaching, all that stuff's very, very different. So yes, they did start to distract people, but in terms of the long term, they're only beneficial to supporting what people do in CrossFit gyms.
And they were happy. And the third thing that started to go against the chain was the success of the licensing model itself. You see, in a normal franchising system, there's a limitation on how many gyms or how many franchises can be opened up. But in the case of CrossFit, there was no limitation. It was simply a licensing model. And the headquarters had no input on how many gyms were to be opened and where. So you had many situations where a gym would be open, be successful, and then somebody else would come in and open up right across the street. And suddenly, instead of having one very profitable gym, you have two gyms, and neither one of them is making any money.
Incorrect. That is fundamentally incorrect. That scenario he just talked about, one gym was successful, another gym opens up, and now you have two non-successful gyms, straight up didn't happen. Well, let me rephrase that. If a gym was successful simply because they were the only guy in town, that might have happened, where another gym opens up and they draw clients away because this gym wasn't offering anything. These gyms felt like communities, they felt like homes. Truly successful gyms keep that running for years on end. And the way they do that is by offering a really good service, and that service is the actual coaching. That community is very intentionally fostered. So the gyms that were good gyms that were successful, now some of them would have been mildly financially successful initially and then lost those members. That could be the case because they weren't fundamentally a good gym. They were just the only guy in town. They deserved to fail, if you ask me. They were the ones, and if you ask Greg too, They were the ones who were kind of doing CrossFit. They were offering the method, but they weren't doing the things that were at the core, which was the coaching and the improvements and the nutrition coaching and the servicing of the community and caring about the bathrooms and all of those other things. If you built that, those gyms stayed. They've still stayed. You could open up 10 gyms around them and they'd be totally fine because gyms around them aren't offering something that matches the quality of what's there.
And lastly, while the spectacle of the CrossFit Games had gotten people really excited about, the competitive sport of fitness and brought people in, it started to do the opposite later on. It got people to associate CrossFit with hardcore exercise and over-the-top endurance and all that kind of stuff you would see on the TV. When in reality, the vast majority of people were very much interested in getting healthier and looking better naked. Well, CrossFit Games were not a good testament for that. And so this leaves the chain.
I mean, CrossFit Games were pretty decent for looking better naked and basically being healthier. I mean, those guys are pretty healthy. A lot of them have sacrificed some health, but how do I say this? The CrossFit Games were always a distraction, but at the core, they benefited the community because they brought attention. If you could walk someone through your doors and show them the difference of what the CrossFit Games was versus what you did in there, then that was like a one sentence conversation. It'd be like, hey, not one sentence, one paragraph. You go, hey, you've seen the Tour de France? That's cycling. We're biking. We're going to do the same thing, but at a very different level. Boom, you've solved it. There's the difference between the CrossFit Games and what happens at a CrossFit gym. Don't pretend you're Lance Armstrong. Let's have some fun and get you fit. The fittest you've ever been in your life. Yeah, I don't agree with this.
Early in 2020 with a polarized image, one where people are kind of scared of the brand. You've got basically this dichotomy of not really understanding whether they're a fitness brand or a competition brand. And then you've got, in the worst case, the gyms themselves not doing very well because there's just too damn many of them. And that left the whole thing really unprepared for what was to come next.
Yeah, no. They're not. His assumption that they weren't doing well because there's too many of them is not true. The ones that started opening up, I mean, a lot of them just didn't understand business. They just signed weird leases. They were super passionate about it, and they just didn't have a product to offer. They weren't coaches. They didn't understand, again, basic business practice of not personally guaranteeing a $15,000 lease on a massive space when you have no members. All of the original gyms grew out of small spaces into bigger spaces, but then you started to see these examples who would come in and set up these really big spaces and just fail. And you're like, yeah, no crap. You didn't know what you were doing, and you started up a giant thing. So let's see what we got.
And that thing was the COVID pandemic. See, CrossFit was a gym concept built on in-gym participation. And during COVID, it was impossible to go into the gym. And if you can't go in the gym, why are you going to keep paying money? And so faced with this kind of stuff, 20% of the affiliates closed their doors during the COVID pandemic. It turned out for them, Zoom workouts just weren't going to cut it. And with Peloton and Mirror and other concepts like that booming during the 2020 pandemic era, many customers left and they just never came back. And remember how the personality of Greg Glassman kind of created this almost cultish-like feel for CrossFit that many people bought into? Well, the next thing happened was that Greg went out and said some stuff he shouldn't have. He went online during the whole George Floyd issue and during the whole COVID issue and basically said the exact perfect wrong thing at the time. He basically diminished both of those things at, well, the exact wrong moment. He declared...
That is true. He diminished both of those things at the exact wrong moment in the worst sociopolitical time that we've ever seen in history. And the interesting thing was what he said was actually not diminishing both those things per se. It was actually comparing them and the way they were handled by an organization. So that was the nuance of what he had said, but that's not how people read the internet. They don't read nuance. They read exactly what was said. Unfortunately, without the context, it was exactly what he said. He diminished both of the two most controversial things in our current, in the world at the time.
Basically, both of them to be a hoax and not worth talking about and to be orchestrated. And that was exactly the wrong thing to say.
He didn't say that. He might have felt those things. I'm actually not fully sure on that, but he didn't say that. What he had said was that essentially the organization that handled COVID-19, he felt did a very poor job. And they were then going to come in and make commentary on the George Floyd situation. And they were going to handle the back end of that. And so he made a quote that was saying, wow, we're going to have like a Floyd 19 situation. So basically saying that you've screwed up COVID-19 and its handling, which no one can say that was handled super well, but we can also argue that how could you have handled it well? It's the first time it's happened in human history. And then this other thing, that was pretty contentious. And how could you handle this? Well, that was his statement. It wasn't saying both of them were hoaxes per se. Now he might have felt that way. I don't personally know, but
during that particular moment. And
it was the wrong
the
thing
whole
to say.
community and the business community rebelled against what he said. They didn't like it. He basically got canceled on that spot. And 7% of the gym affiliates announced they were quitting within a few hours of him doing that. And his title sponsor, the folks funneling a lot of money into the brand, Reebok, they quit too. And finally, waking up to the error of what he said, Glassman, who was initially kind of resistant to making any change, was forced to make an apology. But
Yes and no. So Reebok didn't pull out. That's the really interesting part is like their contract was ending, and the contract was ending that year, and they had already said that they were done. And the whole thing, like everyone who like pulled out, they already had tenuous relationships with CrossFit, and it was actually really ugly because they used all of this time and this conflict as like this moral signaling around we're pulling out. And it's like some of them may have actually felt that. I can't say that all of them didn't, but I know personally a number of them. I know a number of like top athletes. I know a number of like people who were like really close to the community who felt like they were getting, pushed to the side, who like used it as an opportunity to say we're out. And they're just shady, shitty people. And that's the reality. So it's unfortunate that he perceived it that way, but is what it is.
the reality was the people in the community and the folks around it, they didn't buy it. Because just a few hours earlier, he had been attributed as saying inappropriate things to a private chat of affiliates via Zoom. And in June 2020, the man whose personality and to some extent personal brand was synonymous with the idea of CrossFit, he was pushed out by the community he had created. And
Yeah, that was true. But it's not just his personality that created it all. His mind was the thing that created the methodology, and which is the core misunderstanding I think he doesn't have. Is like there is a unique methodology and approach that exists within CrossFit that doesn't exist anywhere else. Now, was the brand created around that methodology, and does it not get highlighted often enough as to what makes it unique versus something like Peloton or Orange Theory or F45? Absolutely. I think there's a mistake in our media that has been slightly rectified recently, but like the reality is not enough people understand what makes CrossFit different, and there's more competitors now. I think that's one of the biggest things that we could say. So Greg wasn't just the personality that created it. He was the mind. He was the vision, and he's a fantastic visionary, and he's an amazing thinker. Now, did he make some bad decisions? Absolutely, when it comes to leading a global brand like this in a very contentious time, and maybe not recognizing, or maybe recognizing his impact on the thousands of business owners under him.
now, as we saw in the subway story in this video right here that you'll see on screen, there's a real danger when a brand associates itself with a single person. In this case, Greg did a lot of damage to CrossFit. So leaderless and aimless at this point,
That is true.
the brand was in trouble.
So Greg did do a lot of damage to CrossFit there. That was a bummer. It was a real big bummer. I don't disagree with that. And there is a disadvantage to making a single man or a single person the face of a brand like that. And I would say that one of the biggest issues that CrossFit hasn't reconciled yet is there's no icons. Like if you had a team of icons, like say you had 5 people who represented what CrossFit was, in my mind, that would be someone like Adrian Bosman. It'd be someone like Todd Widman. You'd have Chuck Carswell up there. You'd get someone like Nicole Carroll in there. Dave Castro is one of them. He plays an interesting role though, because he kind of plays the bad guy in certain scenarios. If you got, let's see, who else? Lisa Ray would be a good one. There's this handful of people, Joe Alexander, a lot of the seminar staff, like if you gave them a mic and a platform and made them the face of what we did, and when you thought of CrossFit, you thought of these people, and put them in places like putting them on Oprah and putting them in, Dr. Phil, and you go in and have all these, I think you would have an easier time if one of them made a mistake, because the other 6 or 7 could be like, this is what we believe. Whereas right now that the single head, the only person who, was associated with the brand on a global scale, really, other than like Rich Froning, but that was the games and a whole different thing, slipped up.
An entrepreneur named Eric Rosa, who'd owned a CrossFit gym himself, he stepped up and with a group of investors came in to buy CrossFit and tried to basically save it. It was unclear at this time if Eric would be able to save it. A lot of damage had been done, but Eric did his best. Like, he's a good business person, and he came in and made a lot of good changes to try to rebuild goodwill,
I don't know about all that. Eric's a businessman. I don't know what he was doing. Like, I saw some of the internal workings of that. Like, there were some, I don't know. I can't speak to that.
stabilize things, try to cut costs, and a lot of that helped. It helped stem the bleeding.
I don't know how he's speaking to that, Michael is. I think he's just saying that. I don't know where the data is that supports that.
Without Greg Glassman and his
And if it was the case, I don't know if that was Eric per se. Very curious as to where he's getting his information there.
polarizing views and personality in the picture, things did stabilize a bit. And in 2022, the affiliate count rose to over 10,800 again.
Yeah, you know what that was? That was affiliates calling out and getting people to pay their dues and stuff like that. So part of what happened there, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, is that there was a lot of affiliates who hadn't paid their dues in years, and affiliates started coming to call, and you had people calling up and getting people back on board.
And things didn't look so terrible for the chain. And in 2022, Eric departed. It was reported that it was over a disagreement with his fellow investors, and they brought in a new CEO, a man named
They didn't say that. When they brought in Eric, or when he left, they said he left amicably, and he was becoming part of the board again, which I don't know about that. I actually don't know.
Fall, who was a former tech executive and a Marine. And the idea was to keep turning around the brand. But a lot of times when you see a change like that, it's because one group wants to be making more money more quickly, and another one wants to be thinking sustainably and building a community. And it looks like in this case, the investor types, the money types went out. And in 2023, the brand kept kind of...
I wonder what he's basing that off of. I'm really curious. If there's validity to what he's saying there, I'm very interested in why he thinks that way.
doing things that would alienate its affiliates. It raised fees, so people who were already kind of struggling to stick on, they would be even struggling even more to continue their affiliation. And with many affiliates starting to scatter.
So he recognizes that they raised fees, and he had that $4,000 mark earlier there, and the fees were raised to a very nominal amount. I mean, it's $4,000 a year. You think you're part of a global chain, and your affiliation fee is $4,000 a year. It's crazy. The brand recognition name that you can have, good or bad, that you can associate yourself with for $4,000 a year and then run your business however you wish. It's crazy to think that that was actually an issue. If a business was struggling that hard to where that was an issue, then they had some really big business problems going on. Part of that raise was to get everything stabilized in terms of having revenue for it. So very interesting to hear it phrased the way he did there, of like, that's alienating affiliates more. It's where their affiliates mad about it, sure, but there was also a bunch of affiliates who are like, yeah, no, I get it. We haven't had our rates raised in 20 years or 15 years or whatever it was.
Again, in 2024, kind of the worst thing possible happened for the CrossFit brand.
The CrossFit community is remembering the life of Lazar Duke.
A man who was competing at the CrossFit Games, the championship of the games in 2024 in Fort Worth, a man named Lazar Dukic. He was participating in an open water swim event at the championships, and he drowned and passed away.
I don't think that was the worst thing to happen. I mean, it's really bad, and it really, really sucks. And the unfortunate part about like super high level events is that like this kind of stuff can happen. I'm not discounting it. I'm not saying he shouldn't have been saved. That like it was about as big of a bummer as possible. But this type of thing happens at events around the world multiple times every year. The acute nature of the focus that we had on the brand and the passion behind the brand definitely changes the perspective of it, for sure. But I also think that like there's nothing that should have allowed Lazar to drown. Like there should have been someone right there. There could have been a float on him. But beyond that, like Lazar was a world-class water polo player. The guy had like lots of swimming experience, and he was in a lake, and this was an event, and it was one of the first events. It's like nothing makes sense here. So there's something quirky with this, but it was a bummer, a very, very big bummer, and it definitely touched the heart of many. But I don't think that was the thing that changed things about CrossFit recently.
And initially, his reports are that, CrossFit handled the PR aspect of it pretty poorly. Though I did watch some of it from afar, and frankly, like they picked up the pieces after a while and started to do a better job. But in the end, nothing could fix the fact that a competitor at the highest level of fitness was doing CrossFit and passed away. And that is bad if you as CrossFit are trying to find a place in the mass market where lots of people are going to want to come do your very safe, quote unquote, exercise and get healthier.
He died swimming in a world-class event. Huh. I guess he's right in the sense that somebody who's very surface level paying attention will hear someone died doing CrossFit. And if they don't look into it at all, then they'll be like, CrossFit can kill you. But I mean, I don't think a single person was on the fence about doing CrossFit and then heard that. And then, well, that's the thing that tipped me over for not doing it, especially if they looked into it at all. Maybe a single person. I don't know. I disagree with this assessment here, but that's just my personal opinion.
And in 2025, the brand has now put itself back up for sale a second time with the hopes that a new owner can come in and change things from the trajectory they're currently on. So it'll be interesting to see if it happens. But man, for a fitness company that is built totally on the brand, they've really put themselves behind the 8 ball with the actions of multiple different folks and some bad luck. There's a lot of lessons in the CrossFit story. For me, the biggest takeaway is the danger of associating a single brand with a single person. You run so much risk if something goes wrong with that person or they make just one mistake. And in the case of Greg Glassman, he did that and it cost everybody.
I would agree with this assessment that it's dangerous to put the single brand in the hands of one icon. I agree with that.
Tens of millions of dollars, including him. Oh, and I promised to let you know why I recorded the hook for this video in front of that red building that was a closed-up garage. Well, that used to be a CrossFit gym. I went to that gym for over 10 years. I was a member there, and I did over 1,000 hour-long CrossFit classes there over a decade. I was that part of the community, and I have a lot of great memories in that place. So I wanted to record the intro there, but that's what I did. And oh, by the way, that CrossFit gym, it does have another CrossFit gym right across the street. Yeah, case in point. All right, so what do you think about this? Do you think
Well, it's not a case in point because that was seemingly a gym that he went to and enjoyed for 10 years. How many services do you use for 10 years? So what happened there that allowed him to close? Was that bad business? Did they change ownership? Did they not fully come through coaching. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm actually really curious as to his assessment as to why that gym doesn't exist anymore. Beyond there's just a gym across the street. That shouldn't affect things if you were so passionate about that community. I'm genuinely curious.
CrossFit is something worth doing. You think it can save itself? What would you have done differently if you owned the brand? Let me know in the comments below. Or if you like the video, tell me you like the video, and I'll keep making them. Thanks for being here.
I like the video. I thought it was good. I thought it was, there's things wrong about it, and it actually speaks to a number of things, like people misunderstanding the methodology as a core thing, not understanding what makes a good gym and a bad gym. There's a few just little pieces in there that, as you heard me speak through it, that I just don't quite agree with how they were done. But yeah, long video. Good fun. Hopefully, maybe he'll see it. Maybe Michael will see it, and we'll unpack some of the history of CrossFit together. But I would love for CrossFit to create more icons and attach more faces to the brand, and then really, really hammer home what makes CrossFit different, which is the pursuit of fitness over aesthetics, over flair and competition. It's just about, we've got this competitive side, but we also care about coaching. We care about longevity. We care about doing cartwheels when you're 80, and there's no other program that gets more people more fit more often than CrossFit, told from 1,000 different stories. So we'll see. Anywho, that's the In Defense of Fitness for this week. There you go.